Welcome to Extension Connection on SuperTalk 1270. Thoughtful information and discussion with experts from both Burleigh and Morton County Extension Service offices. Extension Connection provides advice on family nutrition, issues in agriculture, lawn and garden, community leadership, homeowner concerns, and so much more. Live from the SuperTalk 1270 studio, this is Extension Connection.
All right, good morning. You are joined this week on Burleigh County. This is Shaundra. You know what? I've been out on maternity leave. I'm a little rusty, folks. So this is Shaundra, the Family and Consumer Sciences Agent, and I'm actually very excited to be back. I'll be joined by Amelia, the 4-H Youth Development Agent. If you have any questions throughout the segment, feel free to call our office after the hour. The number is 701-221-6865. And actually, this morning, I am going to be talking about food preservation, a little bit about food safety, and I'm thinking about all of you hunters out there. So we're going to be talking specifically about preserving wild game meat, preserving meats. Some of you might be people who get maybe a chicken or even, I think, those smoked turkeys at the Hutterite colony. We can talk about how to can chicken, and if I don't cover something in this hour, feel free to call me. Again, it's 221-6865 at the Burleigh County Extension Office. And again, thanks for joining us if you're just tuning in. All right, sometimes last year I had a booth at one of the Sportsman's Expos, and I had some nice information that pointed you to our website. And, the first thing that we covered is there's a few different types of food preservation, different categories. I'm going to talk first about freezing. Actually, your freezer and your refrigerator are a form of food preservation. It helps you keep your fresh foods longer. And meat is no exception, especially when you're harvesting your own as you hunt and get your own meat. So preserving wild game it's actually a very nutritious and wholesome food. But the thing is that you should handle it and preserve it very carefully. And it's important to not only retain the food safety element of the product, but also the quality. I mean, you don't want to eat food or eat meat that tastes funny, or as it sits in the freezer too long, it can taste rancid. Some of you might know that as freezer burnt or something, but that's not a very technical term. Typically, what's happening is the oxygen environment is breaking down the food quality. So you can still eat it. That would be the difference between food safety and quality. They're two different categories, but very closely related. And so, it's just like your hamburger, your domestic meat at the store. Wild meat is also perishable, and it's actually considered, meat and dairy products are considered high-risk foods, which is why, specifically with meat, for the most part, is inspected by USDA versus the majority of our food products we eat are inspected by the FDA on a federal level. So we have to maintain a high level of safety. And after I've plugged the reason why I'm doing this segment, we'll get into a couple tips here. So when it comes to freezing meat, good quality frozen game meats, okay? Well, first of all, and we have this saying across anything, whether it's asparagus, whether it's, your peaches, freeze meat or any product while it's in fresh and in top condition. We always say preserve your best. So don't take meat out of the freezer and then decide to can it. You can do it, but this is where we get into that quality aspect of, well, you've already preserved it in one method. Now you're going to switch it over to another method, and it's probably not in its top condition. And so again, while it's fresh and in top condition. And this is specifically freezing now. So select the proper freezer wrapping materials. And a lot of times people will say, well, I'm just going to put it in a Ziploc bag. Well, there are actually, and whatever type of sealing type bag you choose to do, there are specifically freezer-safe bags that have a more significant barrier of protection. So make sure for premium quality, you're wrapping your materials in a type of moisture and vapor resistant product. So I'm also thinking of freezer paper. It's white. Be sure to use packaging materials designed specifically for the freezer. And usually it says it on the materials. that you would purchase. Vacuum packaging of meat before freezing will actually help maintain excellent quality of the meat. And just make sure that your vacuum packed products are indicate that they're freezer safe. Now, why, you might ask, vacuum packaging? Well, here's the point. And just like you would go to the grocery store for a domestic meat, you're pulling that air out of the product. Oxygen really breaks down meat. And so if it's exposed to oxygen, you really are diminishing your quality of and time frame that the quality is maintained. And actually in the food production, food processing world, which a lot of you know is my background, you infuse back into like lunch meat containers nitrogen to take the place of oxygen. So nitro infused, and it's because it doesn't affect the quality, nor does it allow it to spoil as quickly. So oxygen is actually, even though we need it for our lungs and to breathe and for mechanisms in our body, you know what? Oxygen can actually break down our food a lot quicker. All right. Well, let's move into our third step of freezing good quality frozen game meats. Okay. Wrap tightly so that, if you're choosing vacuum packaging, which a lot of you do, you're going to get it covered. But press out as much air as possible if you don't have a vacuum packer. You want to freeze and store at least at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. And I really do recommend that you monitor both your refrigerator and your freezer for the current temperature within the environment. So put a little thermometer in there, and if you're storing at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, you're just helping out your meat to maintain its quality longer. And so in the past, and like I said before, my background is food processing, so I've done a lot of this on the commercial side, and I used to do actually some tests on the quality, and we called them shelf life tests, okay? And we would do 3 different temperatures to see how long our products stayed fresh, and those temperatures were negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and then 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And remember, in the freezer, your microbes aren't able to grow and proliferate, so the you can keep your food product in the freezer for a long time. USDA recommends no longer than a year for quality, and that's that second category that I was talking about. So it's not going to hurt you, but if you keep anything in the freezer longer than a year at 0 degrees, it's not going to taste very good. It's just not fresh anymore. And so the colder your freezer is, it's going to take a little bit more energy, but the longer the quality is maintained. So that negative 20 in those shelf life tests really produced a better quality product. So just know that as you're storing. And the last point before we go to break is just avoid the long storage periods, which is kind of what I was getting into. And so, you want to preserve your meat, but by the time you go to hunt again that next year, hopefully your meat store is gone, and that's kind of the rule of thumb. All right, well, we're going to take a break. More about storing your fresh game, food preservation, and food safety after this.
Right now, 44.
News and Views with Joel Heitkamp. Weekdays on SuperTalk 1270.
All right, welcome back to the Extension Connection. This is Shaundra Zieman-Bolinske, Family and Consumer Sciences agent, and my disciplines that I like to focus on are food safety, health, wellness, nutrition is one. We do some family finance, and then we also do human development and family science. Today we're talking in that nutrition, food safety category about what to do with your game as you're out there hunting. It's duck and goose season where it's about to be opening deer, and we're going to help you out in preserving that. I'm joined here by Amelia Dahl, 4-H Youth Development Agent.
Good morning, everyone.
All right. Well, and actually, Amelia, why don't you share with everybody what to hang on with on what you're going to talk about?
I'm just going to talk about family mealtime and the importance of it, because as we start to get busier, it seems like this time of year is when everything starts to pick up again. Yeah. Kids are getting into sports and activities and joining 4-H and in Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts, and just the importance of sitting down to a good family meal.
Right. And we actually in Extension have, if you think that this is an easy subject, you probably have a small family, I'm guessing, because there are many subjects to discuss as it pertains to sitting down and the benefits of getting together with your family over a meal. I think our series is 12 at least different lessons on various benefits. So we're only going to touch the tip of the iceberg today. But let's get back to food preservation and preserving our meats. And, as it pertains to the different types of preservation, we've got quite a few categories. Did you realize that freezing in the refrigerator is one type of method of preservation, or two types, I should say, the freezer versus the refrigerator. So our refrigerators are usually set at about 0 to 40 degrees, usually at about 35-ish degrees Fahrenheit. And your freezer needs to be under 0. I talked about that earlier about maintaining the quality. But I tell you what, if I don't cover something today, feel free to call us at 221-6865 because we have all kinds of resources to help you figure out how to, and I'm going to go through my list. Here it is. I was looking for it. We can tell you how to cure and smoke your game. We talk about pumping it. We talk about dry curing. And when it comes to curing, usually that equates to there's a type of food chemical in there. Usually it's sodium nitrite, or even sometimes sodium nitrates to cure. And those ingredients are regulated by law, so you don't want to use too much because we know that if you overdo it, it can actually be harmful to our bodies. But if you're used in the right amounts, it's absolutely non-toxic. And so then we go into drying or making jerky. That's the next one I'm going to give you some details on.
Jerky is my favorite.
Hey, yes, jerky. And the big thing is on that, do you cut against or with the grain on jerky? I'm just going to give you a
I just
quiz.
steal it from my dad.
Okay. Well,
I don't make my own jerky, and I will probably eventually because I'm getting back into hunting. But my dad lives in Montana, so he can harvest like 4 or 5 deer a year.
Yeah.
And so he has more jerky than my parents know what to do with, and my kids love it. So about 2 or 3 times a year, I get a very nice smelling package in the mail with jerky in it.
Hey, that's actually neat. So does he smoke it and everything?
Yes, he has a smoker.
Okay. Yep, so that's great. And that's exactly, and I do believe that the last time he came to our office, he checked out our publication.
He did.
On preserving wild game.
Yep.
Yeah. And he probably had a couple things that he wanted to see improve. We did redo it here in 2012, and I think he had seen the older version. So at least I think a couple of things were addressed. And, hey, we always learn more as we go along. And that's, the case with food microbiology as well. Okay, we can help you make a corning game, which is very interesting. Cooked corned meat. We can tell you how to do that.
Do you like corned meat?
Well, actually, it's just a type of brine. I'm not in love with it, but if it's done right, you can. There are certain restaurants out there that have made me like eggplant. It's probably the only food that I don't care for, but eggplant Napoleon, and I'm going to say it's done at the Progue here in town. Very good. They did it the right application. So it just depends on who's doing it, probably. But I have to tell you that here's a tidbit of information. That's the very first call that I took in the office 2.5 years ago when I joined our office in Burleigh County. How do you make a Cornish game hen or just, corn something? And I think they actually wanted to do non-poultry. But, okay, let's keep going. I can tell you how to can the meat, and we'll probably do that here in this segment. Making sausage. Who doesn't make sausage? This is a big one. We have all kinds of help around this. And I can tell you that NDSU, and it was grant funded. We don't have the grant funding anymore, but we have a program that tells you how to make sausage and a lot of these different meats, and it's called Barbecue Boot Camp. And I'm pretty sure the last time that we offered a big, really awesome barbecue boot camp, I know we did it in 2010, before I joined Extension. If you want Barbecue Boot Camp back, call our office, 221-6865. We'll get you on a wait list because sometimes we aren't sure if we need to go down that avenue or not, and if we get a wait list, we'll make it happen. Let's see. And then we've got freezing. I talked about that. Pickling and canning fish. So there's even a recipe in here for pickled herring, which I know my grandpa likes to do.
My Uncle Dave, if you're listening out there, Uncle Dave, makes canned fish. And no
Yeah.
offense, Uncle Dave, but it's horrible.
No, what is he? Well, and who knows? Maybe you're not a seafood person, though.
I'm not.
Okay, well, that's probably why. But I can tell you, my uncle makes some great pickled northern. Truly,
That's what Uncle Dave cans.
Okay, well, and so we don't want to turn you pickled northern people off because I'm in love with pickled northern, and especially my uncle's, and he has a nice secret seasoning he doesn't tell anybody
Oh,
about.
it's top secret, huh?
Those are subjects that we can help you with as it pertains to freezing your meat. I am going to publish a public service announcement. Look for it in the papers. Hopefully they pick it up about freezing and drying your meat next week, likely. So I've got a jerky maker's checklist for you, and I do want to run it through if you don't happen to see the publication or the public service announcement. So the first thing when it comes to making jerky, it helps to pre-freeze your meat. Any guesses on why?
It's easier to cut.
Yes, a lot easier to slice, and that's exactly right. So here's the answer to what I asked Amelia earlier. Do you cut with or against the grain when it comes to meat?
I'm going to say against the grain.
Oh, exactly. And so the way that and if you don't know what that means, the long muscle, usually it's the length of the muscle as you harvest it out of the animal, and it says for tender jerky, cut at right angles to the long muscle, which is against the grain, right angles and 90 degree. Yeah, so remove as much visible fat as possible to help prevent off flavors. And any of you who've butchered before wild game know that sometimes those off-wild flavors are harbored in the fat. It's a little different than a domestic meat. Yes, it makes it a little more tender, but with wild meat, sometimes those remain in the fat. So you do want to take off as much as possible. And then it does say here when it comes to cutting jerky, if you're doing strips, usually don't do it any thicker than 1/4 of an inch thick. And that can be for food safety purposes, so it dries out fast enough to ward off the bacterial growth.
Well, and that would be, any thicker than that, when you go to eat it, it's just going to be like, I wouldn't find that very appetizing.
I know, because you're going to chew and chew and chew. Absolutely. 1/4 inch is pretty thick.
That is super thick.
Yeah, just think of the jerky you buy in the store. It's it's a lot thinner. I'd say 1/8 of an inch.
I would say even like a 1/16 sometimes.
Yeah.
You can almost see through it.
So prepare 2 to 3 cups of marinade of your choice in a large saucepan. And I'm just going to give you a little recipe here, so it gives you an idea of what you have to do. All right, so you've got a saucepan out. So you bring the marinade to a full rolling boil over medium heat. Marinade, we're not going to get into. We have some recipes, but I'm not going to get into the recipe of the marinade itself. So you can, check out online or definitely come to us for some resources. I know USDA has great resources for jerky marinades too. And remember, when you're looking at your resources, make sure it's a credible resource. Anytime you work with any extension program across the country, so whether it's Iowa State or Ohio State or, NDSU like we are, as well as USDA, you should be safe. Okay, well, let's get through this recipe and then we're going to take a break. So what you do after you boil the marinade, and medium heat, that's key, so that's how long it takes to boil. Add a few meat strips, making sure they're covered by the marinade, and reheat to a full boil. It's kind of like when you're blanching vegetables. So you don't start the clock until the boil occurs again, kind of deal. Well, in this case, you need to bring it back up to a full boil. And that does have to do with proper temperature for food safety purposes. Remove pan from range after it's come to a full boil. Using tongs, remove strips from hot marinade. So you want to actually work quickly here to prevent overcooking, and then place it in single, non-overlapping layers on the drying racks. Okay, so what happens is when you are cooking your food, it actually doesn't stop cooking even when you take it out of the oven immediately. So this is why they're saying it can overcook even if it's off the water. So you want to get it out of that boiling water quickly. All right, so dry at about 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit in a dehydrator. You test for doneness by letting a piece cool, and when cool, it should crack but not break when bent, is kind of how you know. So then you can refrigerate or keep it in baggies. All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and finish on why you need certain temperatures for making jerky, and we'll talk about canning meat.
Right now, 44.
Live news headlines and weather together. Weekdays on SuperTalk 1270.
All right, welcome back to Extension Connection. You're joined this week with Burleigh County agents. My name is Shaundra Zieman-Bolinske. I'm the Family and Consumer Sciences agent. I'm joined here by Amelia Dahl. She's the 4-H and Youth Development agent.
Good morning.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Almost afternoon.
Yeah, actually, that's true. We're always on the cusp, so really it could be either.
We need to come up with a term for that. Like, I feel like there should be a mix between morning and afternoon.
Yeah, like good, like brunch is a mix, you know that word. Yeah, that'd be
I'll
good.
work on that.
All right. Well, we're really catering to those of you who are hunters and gatherers. We're talking about food preservation and storing your game meats. And we talked about freezing. We talked about jerky a little bit. And over the break, I checked out USDA's website, and they talk about what is jerky. And I kind of want to read this to you. We recommend that because jerky is a method of drying your meat, and we just gave you the recommendation of you want to dry it about 140 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is one of these important steps. I know I don't expect you all to be food scientists, but this is food safety now. It's required versus quality. Quality is something that's not going to hurt you, but it might not taste the best. Now, food safety, you've got to adhere to because it's a safety thing. And the reason why we want to be above 140 is because, to make jerky, it's going to be stored on the shelf. Pathogenic bacteria are the ones that cause foodborne illness that can hurt you, are likely to survive the dry heat of a warm oven, especially at the 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? That's where they thrive. Or just at the point in which they're over 140 is when they start dying off. And so you want to be above that with a dehydrator. Include, there's all kinds of scientific background that we can look at, but we don't need to go there. So what's jerky? They actually define it. USDA is really big about defining their terms. They call them standards of identity. And if you don't do this for like an Italian sausage, if there's not like 3% Italian seasoning, it can't be called an Italian sausage or whatever the percentage is.
I guess it helps with consistency from the consumer's standpoint.
True. Then, we don't have Italian sausages that are all over the board.
Well, and you're not thinking you're buying jerky and you end up with meat sticks.
Right. Pepperoni or whatever. Right. Yeah, I guess so. So what's jerky? This product it's usually nutrient-dense meat, just like our wild game is, high quality, and has been made lightweight by drying it. And I thought this was interesting. So a pound of meat or poultry, you've got a pound there, weighs about 4 ounces after being made into jerky. So wow. How much are you losing? Like 2/3?
Like 12 ounces,
16
right?
ounces, and so it goes down to 4. A fourth. You're losing 3/4 of your weight.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so that's, you've heard that we're water. Our bodies are made of a lot of water. Same with your wild game. And so that's really what's going away.
I just never thought about that.
Right.
But wow.
Yeah, so it's a lot. Because most of the moisture is removed, it's then shelf stable. And that's another method of food preservation, drying. And the microbial growth, specifically for those pathogenic bacteria that hurt us with foodborne illness, need moisture to survive. And so that acronym FAT-TOM, the M is moisture. They typically, you can control moisture, you can control the growth of microorganisms. If you can control the time and temperature, you control their growth. If you control oxygen, you can control their growth. Sometimes they need it, sometimes they don't. And so that acronym altogether helps us control what we're eating and make sure that it's safe. And interesting point, jerky is a food known at least since ancient Egypt. We have in history, humans made jerky from animal meat that was too big to eat all at once, such as bear, buffalo, or whales. North American Indians mixed ground dried meat with dried fruit or suet to make pemmican. And I did read about that when I read about Lewis and Clark and Undaunted Courage. Very good book if you have enough time. They have the unabridged version, which is really thick, though, so you can give yourself some time. So that a little bit about jerky and why that temperature is important. Now,
I wonder if they made sure that their ovens were higher than 140 degrees.
Right. Well, who knows?
How would you do that?
Yeah, and that's why your great-grandma's recipe when it comes to canning might not be the safest anymore, because I'm sure, if it wasn't done perfectly right. Now, I do know that the fruit did help with the acidity in that acronym Fat Tom. The A stands for acidity, the pH. So, it took it down. I mean, and I think they usually sealed it with fat, and so the oxygen couldn't get in. So there are various different ways. Maybe they didn't even use the time and temperature at all, which is what you're referencing with the oven. So it's kind of a big mix of what you've got to do, but different methods.
And that's a good point, that if you have your great-grandfather's recipe on sausage or jerky, that you need to make sure that it meets these standards that we're talking about, because just because they didn't cause any foodborne illness doesn't mean that
that's exactly right.
it wouldn't today.
So usually what we do is you bring in your recipe, and we are not the experts as far as saying your recipe's okay. What we can do is we can side by side pull up an extension or a USDA recipe and compare the two to see if the ingredient amounts are similar, the time processing amounts are similar. And that's about as close as we can get.
Because food preservation technology has come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you think back to even when my mom canned, things were different.
Right. And a lot of times you'll say, well, nobody's gotten sick. And usually, my immediate response to that is it's all about chance. It's just like if you were to close your eyes, walk across the interstate, you're going to get across more often than not because other people are going to avoid you, but eventually you may get hit. And that's even the case with when you go out to a restaurant and you get food poisoning. No scientist out there likes that, quote, food poisoning, because it's not scientific enough, but it is a type of non-pathogenic foodborne illness because something was missed. So all foodborne illness, all food poisoning cases are actually preventable if you're following proper food safety measures.
And I think sometimes people who can at home or preserve at home don't think they need to follow all of the steps. But I have gotten to the point that when somebody brings me something that they've canned at their house, unless I know that they follow all the rules, I'm like, oh,
me too.
Oh, thanks.
I know it.
And that's no offense to them. I just don't want to feed my kids something that could be questionable.
And so if you're wondering, I want to sell my canned products at the farmer's market, we do have a method to support you, and we're actually going to do that tomorrow. Our office is able to check your product for proper pH. We do charge $25 to check a batch, or $25 for 2 jars if you don't know if it was in the right batch. We can, that's usually our method, $25 per test. And you just call us, 221-6865. Morton County office also has that capability.
And their number is 667-3340.
Thanks. Okay, so this last method here that I want to talk about for food preservation, and we can touch on sausage if you want to at the end, depending on how much we talk about family meal times. But my friend Jim, I'm going to shout out to you, Jim. You wanted to know how to can chicken, or can you in the first place? Absolutely. I mean, usually what
a lot of people do.
Yeah, canning chicken. I did some broth 2 years ago, and it was chicken broth, and it was, literally this broth to make soup. I don't know if it was because I did it myself or what, and a lot of the nutrients I let soak from the bone marrow and and I don't know if there's marrow in poultry, I guess, but they say soak the bones so that you can get all the goodness out, including some calcium and things. It was like the soup was like bringing you back to life soup. You just immediately felt like you had energy.
That's funny you say that, because I've got to that point with spaghetti sauce in our house. But a few years ago, my friend Heather and I canned spaghetti sauce, and we canned it, and it was so much work. And we're like, we really hope this doesn't taste good because we don't have to do this again. And we totally spoiled ourselves. Yeah. So sometimes it is worth that extra effort to can your own chicken broth, because it will make it better.
Right. And you can just grab a jar and throw it on noodles, or, it's a quick dinner. I literally have 10 minutes to cook dinner. So I really have to prep on the weekend. Yeah. So let's talk about canning chicken. Now, this applies to rabbit, duck, goose, turkey, game birds. Okay, this recipe applies to all of them. Yep, pheasant. Sure. And even I wonder if you can pull the breasts out of
grouse.
No, grouse isn't what I was thinking of. I don't know. I kind of pay attention when the guys talk about bird hunting, but you call me because we can find out if it falls into this category. Excuse me. So the procedure is Of course, we want to preserve our best. That and my story about walking across the interstate. I'm always going that I'm going to say those two comments, and we talked about it earlier in the session. So large chickens are more favorable than fryers, which is helpful to know. So how big do you want it? Dressed chicken should be chilled for 6 to 12 hours before canning. So chill it before canning.
Now, Shaundra, can you explain what dressed chicken means in case there's anybody out there who goes all Amelia Bedelia on it and thinks you're...
Right. Well, and I don't have an exact definition because, I'm the science person, but it means that it's truly in its original form minus the feathers, basically.
Gotcha.
So you have your skin and basically everything on it. Which is probably the only time you do that is Thanksgiving, anymore. But really, it's not that hard to do. And my husband's actually, a lot of the men know how to do this because of their hunter interest versus even the women in the kitchen nowadays. So it's nice to have a class with both genders coming to because we can all contribute. I guess I don't want to genderize, but that's what I'm finding to be the case today with people in the kitchen. So dressed means its original state. We don't see that very often now.
Gotcha.
Dressed rabbits should be soaked 1 hour in water containing 1 tablespoon of salt per quart and then rinsed, it says. Okay, so in other words, you want a little salt with the rabbit. Remove excess fat, and we do that with our game meats. Cut the chicken or rabbit into suitable sizes for canning. Can with or without bones. And I wanted to say that one of the reasons why we get rid of the excess fat, and I learned this when I was doing my broth too, that it can affect the seal. So, so I've actually had calls about canning butter. It's not recommended. When you can a fat, it can very much affect the seal. And headspace is very important. All right, so there's a couple ways you can hot pack or raw pack your chicken. You can check out our website for this information at Burleigh County Extension. And then remember, when you're canning meat, you have to pressure can. You cannot water bath can, so you need a pressure canner. All right, well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll finish up pressure canning and talk about family meal times and its benefits.
Right now, 44.
News headlines and weather together. Live on SuperTalk 1270.
All right, good morning. Welcome back. It's almost the afternoon, but we were talking earlier, we almost need a definition for this time where it's still morning, but not quite afternoon. We're just on the cusp. Yeah, exactly, like brunch. So you're joined here by Burleigh County. My name is Shaundra Zieman-Bolinske, Family and Consumer Sciences Agent. I do specialize in food safety, and that's what we're talking about today. Preserving your game meat as you're about to hunt for deer, and you probably are hunting. You've been hunting pheasant, duck, goose. And then I'm also joined here by Amelia, 4-H Youth Development Agent.
Hello, hello.
All right. Well, let's finish up our chat about how do I, can chicken? Can I even do it? You absolutely can. The important thing here is that just temperature and time alone isn't safe enough here in that paradigm of food safety. You need a little bit more. So we're actually saying that you've got to add pressure to non-acidic foods, and we call them low-acid foods. Chicken is one of them. Our meats are some of them. Dairy as well are low-acid foods. Vegetables are considered low-acid foods. So we've got to add pressure. You cannot can these safely and render them shelf-stable. Different if you put them in the fridge. But you can't render them shelf-stable without a pressure canner.
Well, and in the fridge isn't going to last as long.
That's right.
As a shelf-stable product.
That's exactly right. So we've got 2 kinds of pressure canners, Amelia. Do you know what they are?
One is a gauge and one is weighted.
Okay, right.
Did I
so
get it right?
They're both gauges, but one's weighted and one's dial.
Dial.
Okay, yeah, good job. So we have you pressure canned? I know you're...
No.
Haven't done it yet because she's a good canner people here. So, but she hasn't pressure canned. And you know what? Maybe you're in that same category. Some people are afraid of canners, pressure canners.
And I got my pressure canner about it was a year after I started this job, and quite frankly, I've run out of time.
Yeah.
I haven't canned since I started at Extension. Isn't that sad?
Wow, right. Okay. Well, okay, so when it comes to dial gauge, you do need to get the dials verified every year is our recommendation. And so our office is able to do that free of charge in this case. Just call us at 221-6865. And for sake of fidelity and to make sure that you get absolutely accurate information, we are asking that you make an appointment to have your dial gauge verified. We did send in our dial gauge calibrator over to who is it again? Pesto, I think, or Presto. I'm sorry, Presto, to get it, make sure that it's totally accurate. And that thing is actually really nice. They greased it up. It doesn't squeak anymore. It's ready to go to test your stuff out for your meat. Okay, so you can actually hot pack or raw pack your meat to be pressure canned. And actually what that means is hot pack, well, basically you're heating it up and partially cooking it almost, versus just adding to the meat to the jar cold. And so you can do either one of those, and then you are able to can it. And I'm going to go to our table to give you an idea of how long you need to can your chicken. All right, so you can actually do this in either pint jars or quart jars. And either way, the big thing is here if you're keeping the bones or not. Okay, so with bones, hot or raw pack, your pint jars. We're going to go for a dial gauge. You want to target 12 pounds because that's where our altitude is here in this county. It's going to take 75 minutes is what you need just for processing time. If you do quart jars, they're bigger, 90 minutes, okay? Now, with a weighted gauge canner, you want the 15-pound weight on there. Usually you get the 5, 10, and 15-pounders. 15-pound weight, because of our altitude, we're above 1,000 feet. Without bones, again, 75. With bones, and actually, I'm sorry, I didn't say this earlier, it's the same for the dial gauge, 65 minutes for pints, 75 minutes for quarts. But, this is easier stuff for you to look at. So just call me for the recipe, and I'll even send one out if you're not a computer person.
And this publication is really nice to keep in your cookbook cupboard.
Yeah.
So when you're, I have the Ball Canning Bible, as they call it.
Right.
And this publication I actually have slipped in the front. So if I do get the nerve one day to can, I have those resources readily available.
Right. And some of you might not have realized that you do need to know the altitude for your area wherever you're doing this. So if you go to a friend's house in a different county or something, let's say you take all your ingredients to Fargo and you get together with family, they're at a different altitude. And so we usually target 2,000 to 3,000 feet in Burleigh County. I realize that some of you may be just under that. If you know that and you're comfortable with that, that's okay. Because those of you who were around in 2011, we know that we were targeting to sandbag up to 1,800 feet. So, yeah, some of us are lower, but we like to err on the side of caution. The majority of our county is that 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Okay, let me give you the full definition of what a dressed bird is. We talked about what dressed means because dressed chicken, this recipe is for dressed bird. So actually, one thing that I didn't mention was, and I said that they're defeathered, they're slaughtered, eviscerated whole birds with the head and feet removed, okay? And that has to do with their vasculation. So again, if you need more information on this, just call me, 221-6865. I love talking about this stuff. All right. Now, sausage making, we have lots of different publications. We have publications on the art and practice of sausage making. Specifically, we have Food Freezing Guide, if you want to freeze your meat, jerky making, then and now, which is interesting. Probably talks about the differences from back then to now.
That'd be a good one for all those history buffs out there.
Right. Wild Side of Meat, Care and Cookery. I took some information from that. Wild Side of the Menu. Wild Side of the Menu. Number 1 is Care and Cookery, and then number 2 is Field to Freezer. And I did talk about some of that information today, too. So kind of an idea of freezing your meat, which most of us do. Making jerky, which lots of us do. Even canning. I didn't cover sausage making. It's a big animal. But the important thing here with sausage is that, it's about your seasoning. And you want to make sure and use the right amount of your cures if it calls for a cure. A lot of our sausage recipes do.
Well, and with sausage making, especially if you're smoking it, you have to use the right seasonings. You just can't put anything in there because that smoking process will impact the flavor and quite possibly the quality of it.
Right, absolutely. And it's actually very important. But, so one of the nice things that hunting allows us is to get our own fresh meat. And, especially if you're hunting your own land, you know what's available on that land for that animal to eat. So you know what you're eating, because what the animal eats is basically the nutrients that you're exposed to.
Right.
And so if, where there's a conversation now about grass-fed versus corn-fed beef, and I don't know all the details, that would be more of an ag agent type response, but there's a reason why some people prefer grass-fed or corn-fed over the other, because of the nutrients that are available in that beef as you eat it. Same thing with your game meats.
Right. So as we're talking about preserving our wild game, just want to do a quick plug for our hunter safety classes. We have a few scheduled upcoming in February, and I know that seems like a long ways away. But Carla Mickle, who's the 4-H agent in Morton County, and myself from Burleigh County, we teach a class that's specifically targeted for youth. It just went live today, and Game and Fish said it will probably be full by the end of the day because of our target that we do for youth. Now, if you have a youth that's in the class and you as a parent want to attend to get your license too, so you can go, or not your license, but your certification, so that you guys can go hunting together as a family activity, by all means, you're welcome to sit in there and take the class and take the test and become certified.
Well, that is a fantastic ordeal.
Yeah.
So you send your kids to our class, and they are hunter safety certified.
Yeah, we are certified instructors through North Dakota Game and Fish. But the big difference is if the kids are coming to our class, it's going to be a majority of youth in our program versus, when I took hunter safety, there was a few youth. I was the only girl, and there were a bunch of old men in the class.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard learning environment for youth. If we talk about the youth development model, it's hard for kids and adults to learn the same way. They just brains don't function the same way.
Yeah, we know that.
And so having a class that's specifically targeted to youth, we've had great success. We've passed over 120 kids through our hunter safety classes. And so I encourage you to check those out. We do schedule them throughout the year. We try and get them done before they need to get their applications in for deer licenses. So check that out on the North Dakota Game and Fish website.
Yeah, that's a great service that is offered. All right. Let's see here now. So I just want to run through a venison summer sausage. There's all kinds of different sausages. You can make sausages that look more like brats type sausages. Summer sausage is usually a thicker diameter. So the sausages that we can offer, Polish sausage, a quick sausage, breakfast type sausage recipe. And like I said, we have a summer sausage recipe. So please call us with that. And maybe this would be a good idea for us to mention at the hunter safety, maybe the last session or something, that we have all kinds of recipes.
Not a bad idea.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is the show in entirety today. If you have any questions about food preservation, hunter safety offered by Burleigh County and Morton County Extension, please call us 221-6865. Thank you.
SuperTalk 1270 KLXX Mandan, Bismarck. Listen anytime, anywhere, online at supertalk1270.com.